When the heart breaks, silence fills every corner of a house that's no longer a home. For 40 years, Ethan Miller's weathered hands moved through empty routines, while rain washed away footprints that never returned. Until one stormy night, when small knuckles rapped against his door, and green eyes so familiar they ached, looked up at him through the downpour. "Are you my father?" she asked, a silver medallion clutched in her tiny, calloused palm. "Sometimes the universe sends us back what we've lost, wrapped in a package we never expected. If this moment stirs something in your soul, if you've ever known loss and the unexpected gift of second chances, press that like button. It's more than approval. It's recognition that some wounds heal only when touched by grace. And tell us, how do you think this story ends? Comment below. Your wisdom has seen enough sunsets to know that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings are born from the darkest storms. The fiercest storm of the year ravaged the plains, turning the earth into a sodden mess of mud and memory. Lightning slashed across the blackened sky like ancient wounds reopening, while thunder rolled deep enough to shake the foundations of Ethan Miller's weathered ranch house. He sat by the crackling fire, a forgotten cup of coffee growing cold between calloused hands that had long since ceased to feel the burn of hot ceramic against skin. 43 years on this land had taught Ethan to read storms. This one spoke of endings. The knock came between thunderclaps, so faint he almost dismissed it as wind rattling the loose boards of his porch. But something pulled him from his chair, some instinct born of too many years alone, listening for sounds that never came. Rain pelted his face as he cracked open the door, squinting against the downpour. Lightning flashed, illuminating a small figure huddled against the railing. A child, a girl no older than 10, drenched and shivering, clutching something tight against her chest. "You lost?" Ethan's voice emerged rough from disuse. The girl looked up, and Ethan's breath caught. Green eyes, luminous in the stormlight, studied him with an unnerving intensity. Her hand opened slightly, revealing a silver medallion dangling from a tarnished chain. "Are you my father?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. Ethan's hand instinctively rose to his throat, to the identical medallion hidden beneath his shirt, the one he'd given to Sarah, the only woman he'd ever loved 20 years ago, the one who'd left without a word, taking with her the last of his faith in anything worth saying. He stood frozen in the doorway, speechless. The girl swayed slightly, exhaustion evident in the slump of her small shoulders. "Come in," he finally managed, stepping aside. "You shouldn't be facing a storm alone." She said her name was Clara. For 3 days, those were almost the only words exchanged between them. Ethan gave her the spare room, once meant for visitors, who never came. Clara slept for nearly 16 hours that first night, curled like a question mark beneath blankets that smelled of cedar and dust. When she finally emerged, she moved through his home like a ghost, watching his routines with careful eyes that missed nothing. She ate little, spoke less, but her presence filled the empty spaces of the ranch house in ways Ethan found both unsettling and strangely comforting. On the 4th morning, he found her in the kitchen before dawn, standing on a wooden crate attempting to make coffee. Her small hands worked methodically, measuring grounds into the percolator, 2 level scoops, then a half scoop gently pressed down with the back of a spoon. "That's not how most folks make coffee," Ethan said, leaning against the doorframe. Clara didn't startle. "Mom said this is how you liked it." She continued her work, focused on the task. Strong enough to stand a spoon in, but with just a touch of sweetness underneath. Ethan's chest tightened. Only Sarah had known how he took his coffee, had laughed at his particular method, calling it stubborn and perfect, just like him. He studied Clara's hands as she worked, small but calloused, with dirt embedded beneath short fingernails. Not city hands, not the hands of a child raised in comfort. "Your mother," Ethan began, then faltered. "Is she gone?" Clara said simply, pouring water into the pot. "She sent me to find you before she left." Left, not died. Ethan noticed the careful choice of words. When the coffee finished brewing, Clara poured a cup and handed it to him without meeting his eyes. He took a sip. It was exactly right. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. Clara nodded once, then slipped past him into the growing light of morning. The storm passed, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and unfamiliar. Ethan found Clara sitting on the porch steps, watching the distant hills, where wildflowers would soon paint the landscape in swaths of yellow and purple. "I can't stay long," she said without turning. "Just until I get better." "Better?" She touched her chest lightly. "My heart doesn't work right sometimes. Mum said it runs in the family." Ethan lowered himself beside her, the weathered boards creaking beneath his weight. "What's wrong with your heart?" "It beats wrong, too fast then too slow. The doctors call it something long that sounds like arithmetic." "Arrhythmia," Ethan said quietly, remembering Mariam, his sister who'd disappeared 15 years ago, and how she'd press her hand to her chest sometimes, breathing through moments when her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. "That's it," Clara nodded. "Mom had it too." Ethan studied her profile, the straight nose, the stubborn chin, the way her eyelashes curled at the edges, features he recognized from old photographs and older memories. "Your mother's name," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "What was it?" Clara turned to face him fully, the silver medallion catching the morning light. "Mariam," she said. "Mariam Miller." The pieces shifted inside Ethan, rearranging what he thought he knew. Not Sarah's child, but Mariam's. Not his daughter, but his niece. The relief and disappointment tangled together in his chest. "How long will you stay?" he asked. Clara shrugged, her eyes back on the distant hills. "A few days, at most." Ethan nodded, following her gaze to where the land stretched toward possibilities neither of them could yet name. "A few days," he echoed. The days stretched into a week, marked by cautious orbits as Ethan and Clara established territories within the shared space of the ranch. Morning routines became silent choreography, Clara setting the table while Ethan cooked, each anticipating the other's movements without words. In the barn, Clara watched as Ethan tended to the animals, her curiosity eventually overcoming her reserve. "Can I help?" she asked on the 8th day, standing at the entrance to the horse stalls. Ethan handed her a brush. "Start with Cloud. She's gentle." The old mare, white with age and patience, nuzzled Clara's shoulder as the girl tentatively began to brush her mane. Ethan demonstrated the proper motion, then stepped back, watching as Clara's confidence grew with each stroke. "Mum told me stories about this place," Clara said, her voice soft beneath the rustling of hay. "About the horses and the big sky. She said it was the only place that ever felt like home." Ethan's hand stilled on the bridle he was repairing. "Why did she leave, then?" Clara's brush paused mid-stroke. "She said sometimes you have to leave a place to find out it's where you belong." The answer hung between them, incomplete, yet somehow sufficient. Later that day, Ethan helped Clara onto Cloud's back, adjusting the stirrups to accommodate her short legs. He led the horse in slow circles around the corral, gradually lengthening the lead until Clara was guiding Cloud herself. When she completed her first solo circuit, a smile broke across her face, sudden and bright as a shooting star. She laughed, the sound startling birds from the nearby cottonwood tree. Ethan found himself laughing too, the unfamiliar sensation opening something long closed within his chest. That night, he set 2 places at the dinner table without thinking. The Saturday market in Redwood Springs had been a monthly ritual for Ethan for decades, a necessary evil that required minimal interaction and maximum efficiency. He arrived early, filled his list quickly, and departed before the crowds gathered, and conversations became unavoidable. Today, Clara walked beside him, her presence altering the familiar pattern. She moved through the stalls with wide-eyed curiosity, lingering over displays of hand-carved wooden animals and jars of wildflower honey. "Can I touch them?" she asked, pointing to a collection of tiny horses fashioned from pinewood. The stall-keeper, Mrs. Hammond, who'd known Ethan since he was younger than Clara, raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Of course, darling, who might you be?" Before Clara could answer, Ethan placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "She's family," he said, the words emerging before he could examine them. Mrs. Hammond's expression softened. "I can see the resemblance," she said, handing Clara a small wooden horse. "You have the Miller eyes." They continued through the market, Ethan nodding at familiar faces that regarded him with newfound curiosity. At the feed store James Blackwood, Once Ethan's rival for Sarah's affections, studied Clara with narrowed eyes. "She has your sister's eyes," Blackwood remarked, the statement carrying an undercurrent of accusation. Ethan felt his jaw tighten, old anger stirring. Clara's small hand slipped into his, the unexpected touch anchoring him. "Mum said true courage is staying when it's easier to run," she whispered, the words meant only for him. Ethan squeezed her hand once, then turned away from Blackwood, without response. On the drive home, Clara clutched the wooden horse, a gift from Mrs. Hammond, her thumb tracing its carved mane repeatedly. "People talk about you," she said, watching the landscape scroll past the truck window. "Mum said they would. She said people fill silence with their own stories when you don't give them yours." Ethan adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. "Your mother was always smart about people. Are you angry she didn't tell you about me?" The question hung in the air between them, honest in its simplicity. "No," Ethan finally answered, surprising himself with the truth of it. "I'm angry she didn't get to bring you here herself." The old trunk in the barn's loft had remained untouched for years, a repository of memories Ethan had neither the courage to face nor the heart to discard. Clara discovered it while exploring the rafters, her natural curiosity leading her to places adults had long abandoned. "What's in here?" she called down, pointing to the dust-covered chest partially hidden beneath canvas tarps. Ethan climbed the ladder, joints protesting each rung. Old things, nothing important. But Clara had already undone the tarnished latch, lifting the heavy lid to reveal stacks of envelopes bound with faded ribbon. She lifted one bundle, turning it over carefully. "These are all addressed to you," she said, examining the handwriting. Her breath caught. "From my mum." Ethan took the bundle, recognizing Mariam's neat script immediately. Dozens of envelopes, never opened, never received, all returned with addressee unknown stamped across their faces. "I moved around after your mother left," he explained, the half-truth sitting uneasily on his tongue. He hadn't moved, but he'd made himself unfindable, changing post office boxes, refusing deliveries, erasing his trail as thoroughly as Mariam had erased hers. Clara's fingers traced the red stamp marks. "Can we read them?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded, helping her carry the trunk. Down from the loft, into the waning afternoon light. They sat on the barn floor surrounded by letters spanning 15 years, Mariam's life unfolding in ink and paper, early letters full of apology and explanation, later ones detailing her life in Oregon, her work as a teacher, her marriage, her pregnancy, Clara's birth, her first steps, her love of horses despite never having ridden one. In the final letter, dated just months ago, Mariam wrote of her worsening heart condition and her desire for Clara to know her family, her history, her home. "I'm sending her to you, brother," the letter concluded, "not because I cannot keep her, but because she deserves to know the other half of herself, the half I've kept from her out of my own shame and fear. Please give her what I couldn't, roots deep enough to weather any storm." Ethan's hands trembled as he refolded the letter. Beside him, Clara sat silently, watching his face with eyes too knowing for her years. "I'm sorry," he said, the words inadequate against the weight of so much lost time. Clara leaned against his shoulder, her small body warm and solid. "Me too." That night, Ethan moved the spare room furniture, replacing the temporary arrangements with pieces from storage, a proper bed frame, a nightstand, a small bookshelf, making space that spoke of permanence. Summer descended on the plains with brutal efficiency, baking the earth and bleaching the sky to a relentless blue. The creek that fed Ethan's southern pastures slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. Grass withered, turning the once lush grazing land into a brittle expanse of ochre and beige. "We need to move the cattle to the north field," Ethan announced over breakfast, studying rainfall predictions that offered little hope. Clara looked up from her plate. "What about catching the rain when it does come?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Not much to catch if it doesn't fall. But when it does?" Clara retrieved a notebook from beside her plate, opening to a page filled with careful drawings. "We could put tarps here and here," she pointed, "and funnel the water into the old cistern. Mom and I did something like this when we lived in Arizona." Ethan studied the childish but surprisingly precise diagrams. "This is ranching, not school learning," he said, though without dismissal. "But everything has to start somewhere," Clara countered, her chin set in the stubborn angle he recognized from his own reflection. Later that day, when dark clouds gathered, unexpectedly on the horizon, Ethan found himself hauling tarps to the barn roof, following Clara's directions as they created makeshift gutters and channels. The brief, violent thunderstorm delivered less than an inch of rain, but their system captured enough to fill 2 stock tanks. Standing in the aftermath, soaked to the skin but triumphant, Clara grinned up at him. "See? Not school learning, just paying attention." Ethan nodded, a reluctant smile tugging at his mouth. "Reckon your mother taught you more than book knowledge." Side by side they faced the harsh summer, adapting to each new challenge with improvised solutions. At night, Ethan taught Clara to sharpen knives, explaining the importance of maintaining the proper angle against the whetstone. She showed him how to fold maps efficiently, creating neat squares that revealed sections of terrain in logical sequence. In the quiet of evening, their conversations lengthened, silence between them transforming from emptiness to comfortable understanding. The old Harrington place bordering Ethan's northern boundary had stood empty since its owner's passing 3 months prior. Joseph Harrington, cantankerous, solitary, respected but never liked, had been Ethan's nearest neighbor for as long as he could remember, though neighbor had always been a geographic designation rather than a social one. The men had maintained a careful distance over decades, exchanging only the minimum civility required when their paths crossed at cattle auctions or town council meetings. During a particularly brutal heatwave, Clara took to exploring the shaded creek bed that marked the property line between the 2 ranches. Ethan allowed these expeditions after extracting a promise that she wouldn't cross onto Harrington land. On the 3rd day of her explorations, Clara returned clutching a leather-bound book, its edges warped and pages swollen from exposure to elements. "I found this in the creek," she explained, setting it carefully on the kitchen table. "It must have washed down when the water was higher." Ethan examined the journal without opening it. The embossed initials J.H. left little doubt of its origin. "We should return this," he said, though uncertainty colored his voice. With Joseph gone, the proper recipient wasn't clear. "I dried some pages," Clara admitted, to see if I could find out who it belonged to. Her eyes held a mixture of guilt and determination. "I think you should read it." Something in her expression compelled Ethan to open the journal, turning carefully to a page Clara had marked with a slip of paper. Joseph's distinctive handwriting filled the page, the entry dated nearly 50 years earlier. "My son turns 16 today," it began. "I watched him from a distance as he broke his first colt at the Miller place. He has his mother's gentleness with animals, though he doesn't know where that gift comes from. Thomas Miller has raised him well, better than I could have, perhaps. But the sight of Ethan wearing Thomas's name instead of mine remains a wound that never heals." Ethan's hands went numb, the journal nearly slipping from his grasp. He read the passage again, then again, the words rearranging his understanding of himself, his family, his place in the world. "There's more," Clara said softly, turning pages to reveal entries spanning decades, a chronicle of Joseph Harrington's silent witness to Ethan's life, his pride at Ethan's accomplishments, his regret at choices made in youth, his inability to bridge the chasm created by old feuds and family pride. "He was your father," Clara said, stating the simple truth at the heart of the revelation. Ethan closed the journal, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. "He never said a word," he murmured, "all these years." Clara's hand covered his, small but steady. "Sometimes people don't know how to say the most important things." For the first time in his life, Ethan didn't feel alone in the world. The knowledge of connection, however hidden, however late discovered, filled a space inside him he hadn't recognized as empty. The letter from Caldwell Development arrived on a Tuesday, its official envelope and corporate letterhead standing out among the usual bills and agricultural catalogues. Ethan read it twice at the kitchen table, Clara watching his expression change from confusion to grim understanding. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her pencil beside the math workbooks Ethan had ordered from the county education office. "Joseph Harrington left his land to me in his will," Ethan explained, the words still strange to his ears. "But there are back taxes and debts. This company wants to buy both properties, his and mine. They're offering to clear the debts and pay market value. Clara frowned. You'd sell the ranch? Ethan folded the letter carefully. Might not have a choice. The bank's been patient, but this drought's hitting everyone hard. Feed costs are up, cattle prices are down. He gestured toward the window, where the parched landscape stretched toward distant hills. Land's no good without water. But it's your home, Clara said, the simple declaration hanging in the air between them. Ethan had no answer that wouldn't sound like surrender. The following day, Margaret Wilson from the general store arrived with a truck full of fence posts and preserved food. Payment for when you helped rebuild after the flood of '09, she explained, waving away Ethan's protests. About time I settled that debt. Throughout the week, others appeared. Families Ethan had assisted during difficult seasons, neighbors whose barns he'd helped raise, strangers who'd heard of his situation through the efficient rural telegraph of shared concern. They brought lumber, tools, labor, water tankers, solutions. Old Sam Cooper, leaning on a cane carved from mesquite, summed up the community's sentiment. You've always been there for us. Now it's our turn. Clara organized paperwork, uncovering forgotten receipts and documenting improvements that increased the property's value. She created posters for a community fundraiser, her artistic talent transforming simple announcements into compelling invitations. Children from town made signs proclaiming, "This land has an owner," and "Save the Miller Ranch," placing them along the property boundaries. Ethan, accustomed to self-reliance, found himself navigating unfamiliar territory, accepting help, acknowledging interdependence, recognizing that isolation had been a choice rather than a condition. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching volunteers depart after a day of repairing outbuildings, Clara leaned against Ethan's side. "Do you think we'll save it?" she asked, her voice betraying no doubt. Ethan's arm settled around her shoulders. "I think we already have." The Spring Festival in Redwood Springs had been a tradition for generations, a celebration of renewal, community, and resilience. For the first time in over a decade, Ethan attended, Clara bouncing with excitement beside him as they navigated the fairgrounds. Tables laden with home-baked goods and handcrafted items formed the heart of the festival, while music from local musicians created a backdrop for conversations and laughter. Clara disappeared into a group of children her age, accepted with the easy camaraderie of youth. Ethan found himself engaged in conversations that went beyond weather and cattle prices, discussing irrigation systems with ranchers facing similar challenges, listening to proposals for cooperative purchasing arrangements that would benefit multiple properties. "Your girls are natural with horses," Sheriff Daniels commented, nodding toward the children's riding area where Clara was demonstrating mounting techniques to younger children. "Got that special touch that can't be taught." "She comes by it honestly," Ethan replied, the acknowledgement of heritage no longer uncomfortable on his tongue. As afternoon stretched, toward evening, Clara rejoined him, clutching an envelope. "It came today," she said, her expression serious beyond her years. "I asked Mrs. Wilson to bring it if it arrived." Ethan recognized the medical laboratory logo on the envelope. 3 weeks earlier, after much discussion, they had submitted DNA samples, Clara's curiosity and Ethan's need for certainty overcoming their mutual discomfort with official verification. They found a quiet spot beneath an ancient cottonwood, its new leaves, rustling softly overhead. Clara opened the envelope with careful precision, unfolding the letter inside. "You're not my father," she said, handing him the document, "but you're the closest thing I have to one." Ethan scanned the results, confirming what they'd already pieced together. He was Clara's uncle, Mariam's brother, connected by blood, and now by choice. "And you're everything I didn't know I was missing," he replied, kneeling to meet her eyes. The silver medallion glinted at her throat, catching the evening light, a symbol of connections that transcended absence, misunderstanding, and lost time. Clara's arms wrapped around his neck, her embrace fierce and certain. Over her shoulder, Ethan noticed townspeople watching with approval, as if witnessing the final scene of a story they'd all been following. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan felt truly seen, not as the solitary figure defined by absence and loss, but as a man finding his way back to belonging. Summer yielded to autumn, painting the landscape in amber and gold. The ranch settled into new rhythms as Clara's presence transformed daily routines into shared rituals. Mornings began with her reading aloud from books ordered through the Redwood Springs Library, adventure stories, natural histories, biographies of remarkable women, while Ethan prepared breakfast. The spare room evolved into Clara's space, walls adorned with her drawings, shelves filling with treasures collected during explorations of the property. A horseshoe from Cloud's last shoeing hung above the door. For luck, she explained, though Ethan suspected she understood more about creating home than luck. September brought a letter from Oregon, Mariam's doctor confirming her heart condition had stabilized following surgery. She was regaining strength, but remained under medical supervision. "She'll come when she's strong enough," Clara said with certainty as they read the letter together. "She promised." Ethan nodded, surprised by his own hope for reunion rather than recrimination. October arrived with early frosts and final harvests. The community preservation efforts had succeeded beyond expectation, with legal arrangements securing both properties against corporate acquisition. Joseph Harrington's journal had revealed locations of untapped water sources on the northern boundaries, springs that had once sustained an earlier generation of settlers. As winter approached, Ethan expanded the ranch house, adding a proper bedroom for Clara and renovating the kitchen to accommodate their shared cooking experiments. Each improvement acknowledged permanence, each decision made with consultation rather than isolation. On cold evenings, they worked side by side in the newly organized workshop, Ethan teaching Clara to carve wood as his father. His real father, Thomas Miller, had taught him. Her small hands proved deft with the tools, creating delicate animal figures that captured essence rather than exact form. "You see, what matters," Ethan observed, as she completed a miniature horse that somehow conveyed motion despite its static medium. Clara smiled, running her finger along the carved mane. "Mom says that's the Miller gift, seeing beneath the surface." The statement, offered without self-consciousness, revealed how completely Clara had incorporated her newfound heritage into her understanding of herself. That night, as wind rattled the windows and snow began to accumulate on the sills, Clara asked the question that had hovered unspoken for months. "Can I stay? Not just until Mom comes, but after." Ethan set aside the account books he'd been reviewing. "This is your home now," he said, the simple truth requiring no elaboration. Clara nodded, returning to her drawing with the satisfied expression of someone who had confirmed rather than discovered something important. The first major blizzard of winter isolated the ranch for 3 days, transforming the landscape into an unbroken expanse of white. Clara pressed her nose against frosted window panes, marveling at the way familiar landmarks disappeared beneath the snow's blank canvas. "It's like the world started over," she said, her breath creating ephemeral patterns on the glass. Confined indoors, they explored the house's forgotten spaces, attics filled with trunks of family photographs, closets containing clothing from earlier generations, bookshelves laden with volumes untouched for decades. In Thomas Miller's study, a room Ethan had kept closed since his father's passing, they discovered a collection of leather-bound journals chronicling the ranch's history from its founding. Thomas had recorded everything: weather patterns, crop yields, births and deaths of livestock, financial transactions, personal observations. Clara and Ethan spent evenings by the fire, reading these accounts aloud, connecting threads of family narrative that spanned generations. They created a timeline on the dining room wall, adding details from Mariam's letters and Joseph's journal, weaving together strands of a story larger than any individual experience. On Christmas Eve, with the storm finally subsided, they rode to the highest point on the property, Ethan on his gelding, Clara on Cloud. The valley spread before them, transformed by snow into something both familiar and new. "Grandpa Thomas wrote about this view," Clara said, consulting a small notebook where she'd copied passages that resonated with her. "He said it reminded him that our time here is temporary, but what we build can last." Ethan studied her profile, the determined chin, the thoughtful eyes, the quiet certainty that had become her hallmark. In less than a year, she had transformed from a storm-soaked stranger into the embodiment of continuity, carrying forward family traits and values without having known their origins. "What would you like to build?" he asked. Clara considered the question with characteristic seriousness. A place where things that are broken can be fixed, she finally answered. Like us. The simple wisdom of her response settled over Ethan like a blessing. That night, they placed candles in every window of the ranch house, an old Miller tradition mentioned in Thomas's journals, signaling welcome to travelers seeking shelter from winter's harshness. No visitors appeared, but the gesture itself felt significant, an acknowledgement that isolation had been a choice now consciously unmade. The anniversary of Clara's arrival approached with the thaw, snowmelt feeding creeks that had been dry the previous summer. New calves wobbled in the pastures, wildflowers reclaimed hillsides, and the ranch bustled with the activity of renewal. For the first time in decades, Ethan opened the property for community gatherings, Easter celebrations, planting parties, weekend barbecues where neighbors brought dishes and stories to share. Clara moved among these events with growing confidence, no longer the outsider, but a recognized member of the community. She established a reading circle for younger children, teaching them beneath the cottonwood tree each Saturday morning. Ethan found himself hosting impromptu workshops for neighboring ranchers, sharing irrigation techniques developed during the previous summer's drought. The transformation extended beyond social connections. Together, they implemented sustainable practices gleaned from Clara's books and Ethan's experience. Rotational grazing systems, water conservation, methods, diversified crops that reduce dependence on single markets. We're building something that will last, Clara observed as they surveyed new plantings along the creek bed. Something bigger than just us. Ethan nodded, recognizing the truth in her assessment. The ranch was becoming a model of adaptation rather than mere survival, a demonstration that change and tradition could coexist in productive tension. As the anniversary date approached, Clara grew quieter, spending more time with Cloud or sitting on the porch steps where Ethan had first learned her identity. He recognized the posture of someone wrestling with memory, giving her space while remaining available. The night before the anniversary, she finally spoke what had been troubling her. "Do you ever wish I hadn't come?" she asked, her voice small in the gathering darkness. Ethan considered the question with the honesty she deserved. "I wish the circumstances had been different," he said carefully. "I wish your mother, and I hadn't lost so many years. I wish Joseph had found the courage to claim me as his son." He paused, meeting her eyes. "But I have never, not for one moment, wished you hadn't appeared at my door." Clara nodded, accepting his answer with the gravity that made her seem older than her years. "I was afraid," she admitted, "before I came. Mom showed me your picture and told me stories, but I didn't know if you'd want me." "Sometimes we don't know what we need until it finds us," Ethan replied, the insight born of their shared journey. 1 year to the day after Clara's arrival, the ranch gates opened wide for a celebration unlike any in living memory. Neighbors, friends, and community members gathered to commemorate not just the saving of the Miller property, but the revival of something less tangible, a spirit of connection long dormant in the region. Tables laden with food stretched across the yard, music from local musicians filled the air, and children raced between activities, organized throughout the property. Clara, confident in her role as co-host, led horseback riding demonstrations for younger children, teaching them to approach Cloud with the respect and gentleness she had learned from Ethan. From the porch, Ethan watched her, this child who had appeared like an answer to a question he hadn't known to ask. In a year's time, she had grown taller, her movements more assured, her laughter easier. The silver medallion still hung at her throat, catching sunlight as she moved among the guests. Sheriff Daniels joined him, leaning against the railing. "Place hasn't seen this much life in generations," he observed, surveying the gathered community. "Seems fitting somehow." Ethan nodded, understanding the observation extended beyond the physical property to the man himself. As evening approached, Clara broke away from her friends, making her way to where Ethan stood. Her expression held a question he had come to recognize. "You still want me to stay?" she asked, the annual ritual of confirmation important to her sense of security. Ethan adjusted his hat, took a deep breath, and answered, "This land has always needed someone to inherit its story. Now it has you." Clara's smile bloomed slowly, a sunrise rather than a flash. "I'm glad the storm brought me here," she said, taking his weathered hand in her small one. Ethan squeezed gently, feeling the calluses she'd earned working alongside him, badges of belonging neither blood nor documents could confer. "So am I, little one, so am I." As twilight gathered, guests departed with warm farewells and promises to return. The ranch, once silent and forgotten, now pulsed with voices, memories, and possibilities. The storm had passed, leaving behind not destruction but roots, deep enough to weather whatever came next. The camera pulls back, revealing the ranch house glowing with warmth against the gathering darkness. Two figures remain on the porch, the man and the child, silhouettes against the kui. Light spilling from open doors. Not alone, no longer separate, their shared silhouette forming something new and whole against the endless sky.